Hello, everybody. Welcome to Out of Character. I'm your host, the Faulty GM, and today I'm going to be doing the very first episode of Gain Inspiration. So, what is Gain Inspiration? So, this show, from now going further, is going to be pretty much split into two parts every time I do it. It's going to be the first part of each of the videos is going to be me doing a review on something, some kind of media, some book, some movie, some TV show, something, and me talking about what my thoughts of it were. The second part is going to be me talking about the inspiration I gained from it and how I can use that inspiration in my writing and my games. And hopefully, from me talking about it, you can gain inspiration either to read this book or maybe just by by contrast, you hear me talk about it, and that leads you to get some inspiration as well. So, without further ado, let's dive straight in. However, I should say this is just my opinion. So if you read this book and you feel differently than me, I'd be happy to discuss in the comments. I would love to know what you guys thought of this book. So the book that we're talking about today, by the way, is called Uprooted. Now, if I look off screen, it's because I'm kind of reading from the script that I wrote out for this, so I can maintain character names, so on and so forth. All right, so let's dive straight in. So this book is called Uprooted. It is written by Naomi Novik. I hope that's how you pronounce her name. If not, I'm sorry that I, didn't pronounce it correctly. Some of these characters have very Polish names, so I might mispronounce them. Sorry in advance. But yeah, so Uprooted is a high fantasy novel written by Naomi Novik, and it's about a young girl named Agnieszka, and she's chosen from her village of Dvernik and the country of, I think it's called Polnia, and she's chosen from all the other village girls from all of the villages in this valley by this wizard that protects the valley known as the Dragon. And he comes down every 10 years and chooses a girl and takes them back. And everybody was thinking that her friend was going to be chosen, but it ends up being her. And while she's there with the dragon, she ends up discovering all the secrets of Polnia, as well as what is going on with this dark magical woods that occupy it. So there's I had this book was a mixed bag. So the thing I will say is that I actually enjoyed this book for what it was. I didn't think it was an amazing book. It wasn't like the best book I've ever read or anything like that. But sorry, this was coming off of me reading a lot of kind of dark fantasy and more like grittier stories. So I was kind of looking for something, um, I don't know, to give me a little bit of hope and humanity, I guess. So this book kind of did the trick. It's very high fantasy, very lighthearted, very kind of fairy tale like. So let's talk a little bit about the characters. So Agnieszka, she is obviously the main character. The things that I really liked about her character that I thought she did really well was that she's kind of interesting and unique. She really does stand out from all the other characters in the books, and she has a lot of good depth to her. The two things that really stand out that they keep repeating throughout the book is that she's super messy. So not only is she messy, but she finds a way to get dirty no matter what. So she gets multiple stains, and that might not seem like a huge character thing, but it's just an interesting tidbit that they throw in to make her seem more realistic, and just more interesting. Like, just a really weird flaw about her is that she's always messy, always dirty. The other thing that I thought was really interesting about her is that her courage, she finds courage by proxy pretty much. She's not naturally a courageous person, and she is not naturally brave. She finds her passion and her braveness through imitating the bravery of other people. So she has a friend who's like the perfect princess, kind of like very beautiful, very talented, very brave, very courageous. So by proxy, she grabs that and uses that in situations where she needs to be brave. So she goes, "What would she do?" And then she acts like her. But they are very specific in, or the author is very specific in making her very relatable in that way, where she's not brave but knows that she must be brave in the situation to do what needs to be done. And I think that's a very interesting way to write her character, and I think it made her very realistic. The problem is she suffers from like the damsel in distress syndrome, meaning that if there's a problem that this character, without spoiling anything, if there's a problem that she can't get out of, she gets rescued. If she goes into a situation where you feel like she could have gotten herself out, doesn't matter. Someone else comes and saves her anyway. Um, and any time that she really does seem to solve problems, it's typically with the help of someone else. So it always kind of feels like she doesn't really do anything by herself. And again, I know that this character wasn't necessarily going for like the strong, independent woman, but the problem that comes from this, I think, is that the character has a lot of really good growth. She has a lot of growth that comes from her becoming naturally more brave and not needing to depend on the bravery of others by proxy. She starts to become naturally brave. She starts to become very clever and very intelligent. But the problem is that the author never really lets her flourish and show you how strong as a character she has become, because she's almost always being helped out by other characters and never really solves the problems on her own. And I don't mean that she doesn't solve any problems, and I don't mean that she doesn't come up with good solutions. It's just that she can't carry out those things on her own, where other characters seem to be capable of handling situations on their own. The other problem that I really kind of had with her was that, or not just her, but like the story itself, was that a lot of the story is kind of force fed to you. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of mystery that goes on about the woods. The woods in the story is a very, very big part of the story. They're like really dark, kind of sentient, and attack the people, and they corrupt the people, and so on and so forth. It's just really evil stuff in there. But the story forces you to know what happens in it, but not because the main characters figured it out. And if that sounds weird, what I'm trying to say is that imagine you're watching like a detective show or like a Batman comic book, right? Where they just tell you the answer, but they like some other character comes out of nowhere and just shoves the answer down Batman's throat, but Batman didn't do everything in his power to figure out what happened. It would make you think less of Batman that he couldn't figure it out, even though you as the reader have already figured it out. And that's kind of how this book is. It kind of shoves things down your throat at the last minute because the characters weren't intelligent enough or clever enough to figure things out on their own, even though the book has dropped enough hints that you as the reader are more than capable of figuring out what's going on before the characters do. And that's always kind of a letdown, to me personally. It might not really be that big of a deal for a lot of you guys, but for me, it's kind of like I wish that they made the characters smarter, that they could have figured it out and not just have given us all this exposition to get all this extra story out of the way. But I do want to touch on the dragon. I'm not going to talk about any of the other characters because I can't talk about any of the other characters without spoiling parts of the book. So I'll only talk about the dragon since he's introduced in the very first chapter. So the dragon is the wizard. Very interesting name. But he's a very cliche wizard. If you think of a wizard, that's pretty much who he is. He's a cranky old man who lives up in a tower and doesn't want to be bothered. He obviously has cool backstory, which gives his character a lot of depth, but for the most part, he never really strays from that. He doesn't actually stray from being the egotistical wizard. I know everything, you know nothing, I'm great, you are, nothing. He's like the grandiose wizard is pretty much what he is, and he never really strays from that. But like I said, I did appreciate the very subtle character growth. I like the fact that he's this old guy, so he doesn't have a lot of growth that he can do. But the subtle growth that he gets from being with Agnieszka, I think is really interesting. I thought it was a really well done way to go about it. The problem is that at towards the end of the book he reverts and kind of changes back to what he was at the beginning, which is kind of cliche, and I don't know, that just threw me off. I'm not going to spoil anything. It's just I didn't really like the way the book ended with him based on the character growth that he had beforehand. It just seemed like he just kind of reverted back, and I don't know. I just thought that kind of defeated the purpose of all the cool growth that she put into the book. Um, Now, the story itself had a lot of pacing issues. It was too fast at some parts, too slow at other parts. Um, the pacing was just so off. The other thing to note about the story was that there is romance in this book. I personally thought the romance between two characters was just unnecessary. Um, I just, I don't know. I thought the book didn't need it. If you took the romance out of it, the book would still be fine. It would be just as just as either good or bad depending on how you feel about the book. But the romance didn't add anything of substance to the story, so I thought it was just kind of unnecessary. Um, the ending of the book was super rushed. Again, this is kind of like what I was talking about when I say that it's all like exposition as far as like secrets go. You don't really learn anything about the forest until like the end of the book. But the other thing is that they add all this extra stuff that they never even hinted at throughout the book into the exposition, and the exposition is given through another character that just came up at the end of the book. So it's like the last like two or three chapters is when like all this new information is just kind of rushed and thrown at you, and it's like, okay, like I guess that's cool. Um, but again, I like the book. It was very lighthearted. The other thing I should note is that the world building in this book is amazing. It's so good. The story in it is super rich. It's very easy to see that there's more than just this kingdom. It talks about the relationships between them. It even gets into like the very small details about uh, wizards and about the forest and how they affect the economy and things like that. It just the nitty gritty details of world building that she puts into this story alone, I feel like is worth the read. It's very subtle. It's not over dramatic, obviously, other than like the expositions of which they cram in all this information. But like most of it is very subtle. Most of it is like like you gain through conversations between characters or through observations, things like that. It's not all exposition. So when they have moments like that, those moments are super good, super solid. Um, so yeah, that's my book review. My book review of this book is that it's okay. If I had to place it somewhere, here's the deal. I would not recommend this book to people. Um, but if you were reading this book, I wouldn't tell you to stop. What I mean by that is it's an okay book. It's a good book. If somebody were to ask me for a book recommendation, this would not be at the top 10 of books that you should read unless you were specifically looking for books with evil forest and a lot of high magic and wizards in it. Then maybe I would suggest this book. But yeah, so that is my review. Wouldn't suggest it, but I wouldn't tell you to stop either. So let's talk about what I gained from this book as far as inspiration goes. The biggest thing that I gained from this book as far as inspiration is the idea of how magic users affect kingdom to kingdom or just foreign relations in general. They make a point in this book to talk about how the single brewing of a potion can affect the stability of nations, meaning if you brew certain potions, the loss of certain potions can literally send kingdoms into war. Um, Now, it's not very clear in this book how many wizards there are or how likely there are to be magic users, but magic users or very powerful magic users are highly sought after and kind of act almost in their own agency. They're powerful enough that they don't seem to owe allegiance to any particular kingdom that they don't want to swear allegiance to. Meaning that if you are born in a certain kingdom and you become a powerful wizard, it doesn't or didn't actually seem like these wizards have to serve you because they're so powerful. They probably can serve whoever they want. Um, but the idea here is that just having one powerful wizard is enough to make another kingdom nervous. Having a powerful healer is enough to make another kingdom to instantly go to war with you. Just because you have one more healer than them, which puts them at a military disadvantage, so on and so forth. But again, the idea that certain potions, like they had this potion called like Firebrand or something like that. Then it was like this potion that cost like 500,000 pieces of gold, and like it was super expensive to make, and just a single drop of it could like start a huge, like extremely hot fire. Um, and the loss of that potion could mean that that kingdom is now at a military disadvantage, and the other kingdom could invade them simply because they don't have that potion anymore. The loss of a healer could be the same thing. The gain of a healer could be the same thing. So it's they were also like most of these countries border the forest, and that forest is very devastating for multiple reasons. But being able to cure people of the corruption that that forest does, again, is another reason that can really make foreign conflict possible, but also foreign relations very tense. For example, if you don't provide that information to them, and their people are being corrupted, but your people are being cured, it's it's something that I've thought about before, but not to the extent that she has put into this story. Having wizards enchant an entire army's weapons, for example, the different types of magic that go into enchanting versus the magics that go into simply casting, the different ways individuals cast the exact same spell, even though it's literally the same spell, it's just casted differently. Um, all these different nitty gritty details of magic users, I just found to be amazing. Um, so I just they were just so good. Uh, but yeah, just what I really took from this is how can wizards and my world affect the uh, the foreign relations between two nations. The other thing that I wanted to mention is the forest. Um, and I just kind of briefly want to touch on this because it's such a big part of the book, but it's such a huge thing for inspiration. They had trees in there that would literally just eat people. They were called like heart trees. And where a heart tree is planted, it extends the reach of the forest. And for those who I've talked to about Sunder, you already know this, but for everybody else, in my world of Sunder, there's a forest called the Planted Forest. I was actually working on this forest, which is why one of my friends suggested that I read this book. And when I read this book, it was amazing. All the different types of trees, all the different creatures, like the fruit of the trees are what can corrupt, plus the pollen of the trees can also corrupt. So if one of your crops, gets cross-pollinated with, the corrupted pollen of the forest, it can corrupt the plants, and then the wizard has to come down and burn all of the crops so that they don't get corrupted, which means your whole harvest is ruined. Just all the fallout from being near this darkly enchanted forest and all the dangers in it, as in like I know in D&D we have blights, and they had very similar creatures that fed on the infected and corrupted fruits of these trees, and these corrupted fruits are what corrupted these forest creatures and made them into darker versions of themselves. So it was making a forest magical making it dangerous and scary and terrifying to go into. Like the tone of the story dramatically changes whenever they enter the forest. Um, and I think that's something to note here. So those are two pieces of like inspiration that I really got. Is just making your forest super magical, making it dark, making it scary. You know, how terrifying is an enchanted forest, especially one that can defend itself, one that can spread. Like if a tree were to have a sense of protecting itself, and more than that, I feel like a tree's main objective would be to spread and then to grow. Would be to spread, grow, which puts everybody around it kind of at danger. Um, so it's just a very, very interesting idea that she had there, and something that can easily be implemented in anybody's game. And again, the idea of magic users and how they affect the kingdom. Like if you are a wizard, right? And you have a wizard in your game, or you're playing a wizard, how does that affect the kingdoms that you visit? Especially if you're a wizard that does not owe allegiance to any particular kingdom. If you're a wizard that doesn't owe allegiance to any kingdom, how do other kingdoms regard you? You know, do they think that you're a threat? Do they think that you're a free agent that works for anyone? Do they think you're a spy? Do they do the opposite? Do they greet you with warm welcomes because they want you to ally with them? You know, to maybe ward off this other kingdom who just happen to get one more mage than they have, which can completely upset the balance. You know, just how does your character affect the game? And even bigger than that, once your character gets to high enough levels, you can cast some crazy spells. Once you learn more magic and the word gets out that you have used said magic, how does that affect your world? Do people start looking at like, just like, we got to kill this guy, he's too powerful, and he doesn't owe allegiance to any kingdom? Or if you owe allegiance and you know you use Meteor Storm to just level out an entire village, does your kingdom then use that as a scare tactic against other kingdoms, and those kingdoms are, you know, like becoming subservient? Or do those kingdoms all band together and go, look, this guy has this wizard that, you know, just nuked an entire orc village, we need to just go and just destroy this kingdom, just we need to just get rid of it so that it doesn't come and take us out next. um, so really, really interesting questions. If you think that any of these are very interesting and you would like to read this book, I again, it please do. It's interesting, and I'd love to hear what you guys think. If you've already read the book, I would love to know what you guys think about the book. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Do you fall in the middle there? What did you think? But yeah, that's it, guys. So hope to see you guys later. Have a good night.